Hey everyone, my name is Rooster, and welcome back to Mechabellum. In today's video, it's going to be one of my own replays because I wanted to feature what I believe is a very strong composition right now, centered mainly around Hounds. And because we're going to be playing Hounds, I think typically the best opener is going to be something like a Sabertooth pack. And that's exactly what we're aiming for by going for Training Specialist here. Training Specialist is lovely because you can level your Hounds early, and that tends to be one of the kind of, things that holds Hounds down in the early game. Managing to get over those level thresholds makes it easier to chaff clear. And, well, with intensive training, you don't have to sweat too much. I'm up against Laomam, very strong defensive player. Now, I do know that they predominantly play defensively, but even if it was a different player, I think with Sledgehammer Marksman, I would be expecting something defensive. And I was also kind of expecting them to set up on the same side of the board here because the left side had a magnetic barricade, which would slow down my push as well as a building there. I could still try and gamble and say, well, if you do set up over here and this side is empty, I might still be able to push in spite of, the buildings being there because there's nothing else. But I kind of felt like, I didn't want to take that gamble. And I also didn't mind facing these units head on. I thought, well, with Sabers into Sledge, even though it takes a while to get through the pack, I do have the tankiness advantage, and I'm not too scared of this setup. So we are going to be pushing into the empty side of the board, and the way that I'm going to position is Fangs here in front of the units to try and screen against missiles and insta-locks. And then I'm going to put the Hounds in between the Sabers, typically a little bit behind the Sabers because they are faster, and you also want the Sabers to tank if possible. At the start, that's not going to always happen because the Sabers have more base range, and that's also why you're often going to be prioritizing an early range tech on your Hounds. We pick up 2, we level up 1, and that's going to give us an immediate break point here against the enemy crawlers. Now, as for the Fangs, I am going to go for double Fang in front, 1 Fang in the back. That way my flank is immediately defended. But it does mean that I have less chaff here to protect my units, and I will likely lose this first round because, well, I just don't have enough Hounds to chaff clear, and a lot of my chaff arrives late because I, kind of preemptively defended a flank. And that's completely fine here. I lose, but I have 5,000 hit points, and I think I should be fine once I get some crawlers in the mix and I manage to get some more Hounds. The idea of this entire comp is just to use the Hounds as your core, often paired with a bunch of crawlers right behind. And you can play whatever carry you want. Sabers are lovely, they can snowball early, but you can play other stuff with it too. Round number 2, we get unit reinforcements. Phoenix is a very, very common unit in this composition. It's just a staple of round 2. Powerful DPS, very fast, so it pairs nicely with the aggro compositions. And when it gets offered like this, it's almost always a must pick. Could you go for something like a Rhino play on the left tower? Yes, but that's only going to last 1 round, whereas the Phoenix is going to be pressuring for, most of this game, especially in the early and mid game. So we're going to pick up the Phoenix. There was a Wasp drop as well, or a Wasp pack, which is maybe worth thinking about, but because I had triple Fang, I thought, well, let's actually see if my opponent wants to go for that. I am going to respect the left side by putting down a Fang behind the tower and leveling that tower as well. And I'm going to start adding some more chaff here. So crawler here behind the Hound, as I mentioned, and then another crawler pack, or a Hound pack in this case, I guess, on the left side of the Saber, because there was a crawler pack over here that wasn't really being dealt with. Idea is still going to be to build more crawlers, but as you can see, the crawlers kind of split up nicely as they pass through the Hounds, and that can be very, very annoying to kill. And it also, again, protects the Hounds for a little bit longer so they can get to the chaff and actually clear it. And you can see already we're doing a bit of a better job, right? The crawlers have mostly gone, and the right side is now starting to take down the sledgehammers. Still, it's a little bit tricky here, and getting through the sledgehammers takes a while. I want to get range on my Hounds. I'm not quite there yet, but at least I've managed to take out a good amount of the enemy units. And it looks like we're not going to be taking too much damage. Left side tower is completely fine here. I am going to be keeping this magnetic barricade, even though I did sell my buildings. Because, well, that just slows down any fast push. and it's not really worth getting rid of that for only 50 gold. Round number 3, redeployment shows up. I am going to pick that. There is an underground threat, which I was aware of. And I thought to myself, why not just put a hound somewhere in the back to try and deal with that underground threat, and then I can always redeploy it later on to, you know, make a different play. So that was kind of the idea here. Redeploy is generally just an S tier spell for aggro. It's very, very powerful. You can move left to right to dodge spells, and you can do some very annoying things on the flanks as well. And speaking of annoying flanks, I'm going to go for this Sledgehammer Crawler play, which is very, very common nowadays on aggro, where you put a Sledgehammer all the way up in the flank, and then you put a Crawler here as well. It's going to be slightly down, because that way it pulls more of the enemy units, and it still protects this Sledgehammer from being missiled. So that's the reasoning behind that. Generally speaking, anytime your opponent is positioning like this with all of the chaff vertically behind the tower, you should try and look to pull it away a bit if you're playing aggro, because it just opens up the tower so much. This is very, very greedy placement, and I generally think you shouldn't be allowed to get away with that. You should be positioning a bit more kind of over here to try and make sure that some of the chaff does go the correct way. And I mean, look at that, right? All of the units are out of position, and the tower is now open. Now, I don't have a beacon right now, so I might not be able to get it, but at least we have managed to spawn in those units, and, well, they're easy to take out on the turn they spawn in, but next round they're going to be a lot harder to get rid of quickly. Sabers are doing an okay job here. They sadly do not quite one-shot the sledgehammers, because they're fortified sledgehammers. But still, we managed to take care of a good amount of the enemy forces. And we also have managed to make Laomam invest a little bit on that left side, right? We have a Fang, we have an Arclight. And that means that these units are not going to be that, you know, invested in the fight. Round number 4, and another redeployment shows up. This time around, I'm not that interested. I could go for Photon Coating, but I decided to skip. I don't think it's necessary to go for any of this. And I'm mainly looking here to go for a range on my hounds. I haven't gotten it yet, and you will often see me say that if you want to tech something, the only thing you should think about is ranging your main chaff clear unit, often by round 4, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing here on round number 4. I'm going to redeploy that hound in the back, which did defend against the spell. I'm going to put it on the shallow flank this time, because while I am pulling away here, there are some fangs in front of the enemy forces that are very easy to take out. And again, I want to pull away my opponent, right? Away from the tower in all directions so that this remains open, or this diagonal. Opponent goes for a crawler flank here, but I do have some hounds there to intercept it for now. And this is pretty much going to be our round. Now, I do go for double attack enhancement here. Very, very early, but I felt like I was relatively comfortable with my hit point total. And I thought that if I could guarantee that the hounds can one-shot the enemy crawlers, I'll be in a good spot. And this is something that you'll very often see if you're trying to play this comp, or someone is playing the comp into you. It very heavily revolves around hounds in the early game. Getting range on them. Getting first, even second attack enhancement on them. Prioritizing more deployments, and even trying to get towards something like mechanical rage or chamber compression. You basically don't need to worry too much about DPS when you play this comp. At least most of the time, that is. If your opponent plays a really big unit and you can't deal with it, of course you have to respond. But in these type of scenarios where my opponent is only playing marksmen and arclights and sledgehammer, stuff that's relatively easy to take out for, you know, a couple of phoenixes or sabers, you don't have to worry too much. Round number 5, Efficient Giant Manufacturing shows up. I'm not interested. Extended Range Phantom Ray is an interesting card, but I didn't feel like I wanted to play it here into the enemy marksman. And I really, really wanted to focus as much as possible on my hounds. And so I take all of the levels, and now, well, we can try and move in. So I'm going to be picking up my mobile beacon, because I was noticing that the tower was very open, but my units were getting pulled apart a little bit, and I wanted to, well, get towards that tower while it's open as quick as possible. We also defend this flank with a hound. I'm going to grab all of the other units that would turn and send them forward. And Laomam here does go for the Vulcan's Descent. Now, I did see it, but I kind of forgot about it during the round, which is certainly my bad. But to be honest, I'm not too afraid of it. I'm still relatively healthy. The Vulcan will likely get pulled a little bit towards the sides because of the chaff. And, well, ideally I would level up this tower, but I kind of forgot about it. And I also am getting oiled here. Now, typically, what you would want to do on these type of rounds is start attacking the left side. Now, I kind of guessed correctly that I am going to get oiled here, or some type of spell is going to be used. And often when that happens around, you know, round 4, round 5, especially with things like redeploy, you should try and look towards an attack. You know, if you don't do it now, certainly the next round. If you see that the oil is on the ground, try and beacon your units away towards the open tower here. Or in this case, do it preemptively because you have a redeploy and the tower is fully open. I go for a sledgehammer flank, it pulls away the units, the tower is exposed and it goes down. 9 seconds in debuff for me, and that actually puts me in a really good spot. The enemy went for a Vulcan drop, which is relatively expensive, and it looks like we are going to be able to maybe even win this round, or at the very least, once again lose with very, very few hit points, you know, being lost. And that is generally speaking a win when your opponent went for a spell that cost 250 and you didn't invest anything, right? Also, oil was purchased, which cost 150. All of that money is going into my own board and it should put me ahead in the long term. We take out the tower here. I don't have any anti-air remaining, sadly, so the Phoenixes will at the very least win the round. But we clear basically everything else here apart from that Vulcan, and we're only going to be taking, you know, 400 damage. That is perfectly acceptable. It leaves us at 2.3k. Nothing to worry about. Round number 10, we get Advanced Power System. Fantastic card if you're playing aggro. Orbital Javelin is a very good spell, but in this case, there wasn't much to aim for. If, you know, the opponent is very clumped, I would probably pick it, but here I would rather have Advanced Power System. Again, there is an underground threat available. I have to play around that if possible. I was mostly worried about kind of this side of the board, because this side we do have the leveled tower. And, well, now I can see that the oil is on the ground. And as expected, a Fire Badger is purchased to light it on fire. Very common play by defending players is to go for oil in one turn, set it on fire the next, and get rid of all of your chaff. I know this, so I'm going to try and play around it as much as I can by beaconing a whole lot of my units around it, especially these hounds I do not want to lose. And you can see that I've gone for the second tech, right? And if you look at my board, the only tech that I have picked up here is going to be range and mech rage on my hounds. Nothing else here has a tech because it simply doesn't need one right now. It's the same thing on my opponent's side, right? Round 6, no techs except on the main shaft gear unit, which is going to be the arc lights for Laomam. I add a crawler there in front of my sledgehammer flank to pull everything away, and you can just see how impactful it is. My level 2 Phoenix has been moved, and it will be able to take out the tower. It was fortified one time, but it's not enough, and 7 seconds of debuff are going to be mine. A couple of the hounds that I moved over did actually turn, and so the underground threat was not successful, and we might be able to get a round win here. I say that, there is one pesky Phoenix all the way in the back of the board there that we didn't deal with, and so maybe I will lose to a lack of anti-air. We're gonna have to see. Another debuff, though, is fantastic. I still have some hounds left alive, and once you get to these levels on the hounds, they become very scary, and they can actually deal with some of the, you know, larger mid-sized units like sledgehammers. That's why this attack enhancement is so powerful as well. You could even go for chamber compression if you want to. I didn't feel like it was mandatory, but it is something that you can consider. And in the meantime, we can watch how one Fang saves me here from taking 100 extra damage, as it very valiantly takes out a Phoenix. And so we will finally be dealing some damage to Laomam, if only, you know, 100 or 206, with the Sabertooth and the Fang surviving. Round number 7, unit reinforcements, second batch. And here I would mostly be looking at either Wraith or Scorpion or Steel Ball. Rhino is good, but because Steel Ball is offered, you probably don't want to go for it. And because you might pick Steel Ball to counter Rhino, Scorpion is very good. So that's kind of the ground situation, which is why I go for Scorpion. Also, I was lacking a kind of good ground-based DPS option here. My opponent was starting to build quite a few sledgehammers. The sabers are not ideal into those, so I'm pretty happy to pick up Scorpions and immediately range them. So that's round 7, right? I have dealt with all of my chaff. As you can see, I have all of my chaff clear, layered across the board, and now I can start thinking about my DPS option, often something you will get from unit drops. It's going to be the Scorpions. I get 2, I buy 2 more, and I'm aiming them straight at the Fire Badgers, the Sledgehammers, and yeah, I mean, we should have a good time. Opponent here shields the Fangs. It can be alright, but I don't think it's especially useful against Hounds. It does slow them down somewhat, and in this case, Laomam has a ton of Fangs, so I guess it does double the effectiveness of all of the chaff you have, but it's not a mandatory pickup, and you can focus on other things. Like, in this case, right, picking up the Wraith, which is what Laomam does and ranges them. I was aware that this was an option. I thought he might go for something else, like the Rhinos, to try and deal with the flanks a bit quicker, but he picks up the air units. Now, my anti-air here is not amazing. In fact, it's only 1 Phoenix, and it's often something you will see at high MMR from aggressive players, that they go very greedy with their anti-air. It's often just 1 Phoenix, because if you can win the ground fast and get to those towers, you really don't need a ton of anti-air in the early game unless your opponent is investing into it very heavily. And up to this point, that wasn't the case. My opponent only had 2 Phoenixes, and they were also unteched. Now, however, we see the ranged Wraith, and I do have to do something about that. So immediately I thought, well, considering I don't have any Phoenixes, apart from the 1 pack, and I haven't invested into them, I can just buy a different anti-air unit that would do better against Wraith. In this case, something like level 2 marksman with AA. And you can see that, indeed, if we win the ground hard enough, which we do, this 1 Phoenix is plenty to try and get rid of the rest of the units. I will lose a couple of my, remaining ground units as a result, but it's good enough to pick up a round win, and now I know what my opponent is trying to do. I see that they committed to the Wraith, and I know it becomes worth to try and grab some anti-air. You might say, oh, but what about the land cruiser tech? Yeah, they might click that, but honestly, I don't mind that so much. If they want to click land cruiser and, make their chaff clearing a little bit worse, also reduce their anti-air against stuff like Phoenixes, and make themselves vulnerable to all of my Scorpions, I'm kind of okay with that. And I don't mind clicking AA Marksman for a round, winning the round because of it, and then forcing my opponent to make the play to go to the ground. I think that's a perfectly acceptable, investment, considering the AA techs are generally rather cheap at 250 on Marksman. We get another play here on the flank, where Laomam tries to get in with a Wraith and a Beacon. And in the meantime, you can see that we have picked up double defense enhancement as well. I've really liked going for these double attack and defense enhancements whenever possible, especially when playing aggressively. I feel like it helps a lot, and it helps a lot, especially with these Hound comps. I go for triple blue marksman, as I said, and I immediately tech the AA to, well, punish the Wraith and potentially force them to the ground. More of them show up. And this marksman here is far back enough that it should turn for that Wraith on the flank. So nothing to worry about there. We do have the missile strike off cooldown. I'm perfectly happy to use that on a bunch of chaff over there and just make it easier for us to get in. Towers, meanwhile, have been leveled. That is often going to be something that you see, especially if the defensive player kind of played so far back that they're getting pulled apart. It's a good strategy, but you do have to leave at least something there because, well, when we're talking level 3 Phoenixes, potentially level 2 Scorpions, level 2, level 3 towers will go down pretty fast. The Wraith goes down, so that play is ineffective. Very happy about that. And now you can start to see the power of our comp. We didn't invest that much into spells early on, and we've managed to get a very powerful setup. With all of these Hounds now running wild and causing big problems for the opponents, the towers are falling because of all of the flanks that are happening. And with all of these Scorpions surviving and all of my shields still intact, we are in a very good spot. Round number 8, and now Lao Mam is down to below our hit point total at 1500. And we get this third unit reinforcement pack, where I am mainly looking at the sandworms. I could go for Typhoon and just sell. I could pick up the Sabertooth if I'm worried about the enemy sandworm, but it's only a singular sandworm, and I honestly think that in this case, I would be fine with my high-level hounds, a couple level 2 scorpions to deal with level 1 worms, and honestly, I can just grab the worms myself, and that will also, right, make the threat a little bit less severe if the opponent goes for it too. They do, and they pick up Mechanical Division. Very common play later on if you get a worm drop, because once you've dealt with your main chaff clear, your DPS, once your chaff has been, layered properly, the only thing you can do to stall the opponent is buying tanks, right? Buying some frontline. And rhinos are great for that. Sandworms are especially good with Mechanical Division. Sledgehammers sometimes can work as that type of thing as well, but in this case, they were picked up early and then countered. So it just makes a lot of sense to go for that. And I pick it up too. I go for the worms, I level 1 of them to level 2 with intensive training, and I decide to instantly go for armor enhancement on top of Mechanical Division to really, really stack the hit points, right? I already have double defense enhancement as well, so 50 bonus hit points on top of that will mean that my level 2 sandworm is almost sitting at 200,000 hit points, level 1 almost at 100,000, whereas my opponent is sitting at 64,000, right? That's a big difference. And it likely will make the difference on this left side attack. Right side, the oil gets put down, but the Vulcan doesn't manage to lock onto it. It's dropped a little bit too far forward, gets stuck on a shield, and so the oil is not ignited. And you can see here how these worms are really buying me a ton of time. None of the units are shooting at the correct targets. Only now we can see a couple of arc lights shooting at my hounds, but by that point, the left side has crumbled. I take down the tower, and 5 seconds of debuff is enough to get rid of all the chaff, and now start locking onto those Wraith, which did come to the ground, as expected, because my opponent couldn't afford to leave them in the air with the AA Marksman. But then they drop to the ground, and they become food for our Scorpions. And that is how we win this game, utilizing what I believe to be one of the most powerful strats that you currently can play if you're comfortable playing mid-range and aggro. So yeah, typically you're going to be starting with Hounds and Sabers. You're going to pick one side. You're going to layer it in such a way, right? Crawlers behind the Hounds. You're going to be playing at effectively this range right here, where you put the Crawler vertically in front of the tower, and then that's where your Hounds will go. And then in between, you can put Sabers early on. You can then later replace them with basically anything. You can play Steel Balls as well at the very start. You can play Scorpions like we saw in this game. You can continue playing Sabers. You can play even some air units, right? Raidens, Overlords, they all pair very nicely with the Hounds because it's just such a flexible unit. Great chaff clearing ability once you get to double tech, and really annoying to deal with. Arc lights tend to not be enough to deal with this. You might ask, how do you counter it? You could try and go for something like a Vulcan very early if you have the money or if you're a giant spec. Aside from that, it can be very, very tricky. Sledgehammer sometimes can get there, but obviously you would run into a Scorpion or Hacker problem, perhaps, at some point. You can try Raiden if you have the money, but it's just a very, very hard strat to counter currently, I think. Anyway, I hope that you guys liked this video. If you did, please leave a thumbs up. Let me know down in the comments what you thought about it. And if you want to stay up to date with my latest content, please consider subscribing. And if you want to see me play live, please check me out on Twitch. With that being said, take care, guys, and see you in the next video. Bye-bye.